It started as a normal commercial flight, the kind that happens thousands of times every single day across the world. The airport terminal was filled with the usual sounds, rolling suitcases humming across polished floors, flight announcements echoing overhead, quiet conversations blending into a constant background noise. Travelers moved with purpose, some excited, some exhausted, others simply eager to reach their destination. Nothing about this day felt special. Nothing hinted at what was about to happen. Passengers boarded the aircraft one by one, finding their assigned seats, placing carry-on bags in overhead compartments, and settling in for what they believed would be just another routine journey through the sky. Flight attendants greeted everyone with polite smiles, helping families sit together and reminding passengers to fasten their seatbelts once seated. The cabin slowly filled, row by row, until nearly every seat was occupied. Among these passengers was a young student, barely noticeable in the crowd. He carried a small backpack and wore simple clothes, nothing that would draw attention. He wasn't talking loudly, wasn't scrolling endlessly on his phone, and wasn't surrounded by friends or family. He sat alone by the window, quietly observing the world outside the aircraft. To everyone else, he looked like just another traveler heading somewhere for school, vacation, or personal reasons. No one knew his name. No one knew his background. And no one could have imagined that this quiet, unassuming student would soon be placed at the center of a life-or-death situation. As the aircraft doors closed and the engines began to hum, the familiar safety demonstration played out. Passengers half listened as flight attendants demonstrated how to use oxygen masks and life vests. Some people watched carefully, while others stared out the window or closed their eyes, already drifting into the comfort of routine. This was a flight people trusted. Commercial aviation was known for its safety, its precision, its reliability. The idea that something could go wrong felt distant, almost impossible. The plane slowly taxied down the runway, engines growing louder as it picked up speed. Within moments, the aircraft lifted smoothly into the air, climbing steadily above the airport. Buildings shrank below, cars became tiny dots, and the clouds opened up like a vast white ocean. The seatbelt sign remained on, but the atmosphere inside the cabin was calm. A few passengers smiled as the plane leveled off, relieved to be airborne. The student by the window watched carefully. He noticed the way the wings flexed slightly as the plane climbed, the subtle vibration of the engines, the feeling of pressure changing in his ears. Unlike most passengers, he wasn't distracted. He wasn't nervous either. He simply observed, curious, focused, and calm. Minutes passed. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and professional, welcoming everyone aboard and announcing the expected flight duration. Weather conditions were good. The flight path was clear. Everything sounded exactly as it should. Passengers relaxed further, some opening snacks, others adjusting their seats, a few already falling asleep. For most people on board, this flight was nothing more than time to kill between departure and arrival. But for the young student, this moment held a quiet familiarity. Aviation had always fascinated him. The mechanics of flight, the discipline of pilots, the complexity hidden behind every smooth takeoff, it all captured his imagination. While others watched movies or scrolled through social media, he had spent countless hours learning, reading, and practicing on flight simulators. Not because he had to, but because he loved it. Still, even he believed this flight would remain ordinary. As the aircraft cruised at altitude, flight attendants began their service. Drinks were poured, snacks handed out, and polite exchanges filled the cabin. Laughter came from a few rows back. A child asked endless questions. Everything felt peaceful, predictable, safe. Then, somewhere beyond the cabin doors, something unseen began to shift. Inside the cockpit, instruments continued to glow softly. The autopilot maintained course, altitude, and speed with flawless precision. To the passengers, nothing changed. The engines maintained their steady rhythm. The plane moved smoothly through the sky. But moments like these, moments that feel most normal, are often the ones that hide the greatest turning points. The student glanced out the window again, watching clouds drift past like slow-moving mountains. He had no idea that within minutes, this calm scene would give way to confusion, fear, and an unimaginable test of courage. None of the passengers did. This flight, which had begun like countless others before it, was quietly approaching a moment that would rewrite its entire story. An ordinary takeoff. An ordinary cabin. An ordinary student. And yet, unseen by those on board, fate was preparing to challenge everything they believed about who could rise in a moment of crisis. No one could imagine that this routine journey, this peaceful flight cruising high above the world, was about to become one of the most unbelievable moments in aviation history. Midway through the flight, without warning and without sound, something went terribly wrong. At first, no one in the passenger cabin noticed anything unusual. The aircraft continued to glide smoothly through the sky, engines humming steadily, wings cutting cleanly through thin layers of cloud. Drinks rested safely on tray tables. Seatbelt signs remained off. To the untrained eye, everything was exactly as it should be. But behind the reinforced cockpit door, a silent crisis was unfolding. The pilot, who moments earlier had been calmly monitoring instruments and communicating with air traffic control, suddenly slumped forward. His hands slipped away from the controls. The steady rhythm of professional routine was broken in an instant. There was no dramatic alarm, no explosion, no immediate chaos. Just a terrifying stillness. The co-pilot reacted first, calling out his name. No response. He tried again. Louder this time, reaching over, shaking the pilot's shoulder. Still nothing. The realization struck hard and fast. The pilot was unresponsive. Training took over. The co-pilot checked vital signs, attempted standard emergency procedures, and assessed the situation as quickly as humanly possible. Every second mattered. The aircraft was still flying at high altitude, traveling at hundreds of miles per hour. Autopilot remained engaged, but autopilot was not a solution. It was only a temporary assistant, not a decision-maker. Inside the cockpit, tension grew heavy. The co-pilot reached for the radio, voice tight but controlled, informing air traffic control of the situation. On the other end, controllers immediately recognized the severity of the emergency. An unresponsive pilot at cruising altitude was one of aviation's most dangerous scenarios. Meanwhile, in the cabin, subtle changes began to ripple through the atmosphere. A flight attendant noticed that the cockpit door had remained closed longer than usual. Another sensed something off in the tone of the intercom messages. Shorter, sharper, less reassuring. These were professionals trained to read situations, and their instincts told them something wasn't right. Moments later, the call came. The co-pilot requested immediate assistance from the cabin crew. Flight attendants moved quickly, exchanging concerned looks as they approached the cockpit. Inside, they saw what they feared. The pilot slumped, unmoving, the co-pilot pale but focused, surrounded by glowing instruments and blinking indicators. The seriousness of the situation hit them all at once. Medical assistance was attempted immediately. Procedures were followed. Emergency protocols activated. But despite their efforts, the pilot did not respond. The aircraft continued forward, guided only by automated systems and the remaining crew's limited options. Panic, still mostly contained, began to spread quietly. The flight attendants returned to the cabin, their expressions carefully controlled but no longer relaxed. Passengers sensed it instantly. Humans are remarkably sensitive to fear even when it's unspoken. Whispers started. Concerned glances followed. A child asked why the flight attendants looked scared. Then came the announcement. The intercom crackled softly before a flight attendant spoke, choosing words with extreme care. She explained that there was a medical situation involving the flight crew, and that everyone should remain seated and calm. The message was calm but vague. Too vague. Passengers looked at one another. Some tightened their seatbelts. Others pulled phones from their pockets, gripping them nervously. A few tried to reassure themselves that this was nothing serious. After all, planes had backups, systems, redundancies. But fear has a way of growing in silence. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot faced an impossible reality. Managing a large commercial aircraft alone under medical emergency conditions pushed the limits of training and endurance. Communication with air traffic control continued non-stop, voices calm but urgent, as options were discussed rapidly. Divert to the nearest airport. Prepare for emergency landing. Assess fuel. Monitor systems. Keep control. Yet even with experience, the pressure was overwhelming. And then, another terrifying realization. The co-pilot began to feel the weight of exhaustion, stress, and shock. The responsibility was crushing. The situation demanded constant attention, precision, and mental clarity. Any mistake could be fatal. The aircraft remained airborne. Passengers remained unaware of the full truth. Time kept moving forward. Flight attendants gathered near the galley, voices low but shaking. They knew what had to be done next. Something that no one ever expects to hear on a commercial flight. They needed help. One flight attendant took a deep breath, then picked up the intercom. Her voice echoed through the cabin, controlled but unmistakably serious. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is anyone on board with aviation experience, flight training, or simulator knowledge, please press your call button immediately. The words hung in the air like a shockwave. Aviation experience? Passengers froze. Some looked around in disbelief. Others felt their hearts race. This wasn't a normal announcement. This wasn't turbulence or a delayed landing. This was something far worse. People whispered urgently. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it had to be a mistake. Another passenger clutched their armrest, realizing the gravity of the situation. The question repeated. If anyone has any aviation knowledge at all, please alert a flight attendant. Silence followed. Seconds stretched into eternity. Most passengers avoided eye contact. Some shook their heads slowly. Others stared straight ahead, fear locking them in place. Piloting an aircraft wasn't something people casually volunteered for. Lives were at stake. Hundreds of them. The plane continued to race through the sky. Its fate balanced on human decisions yet to be made. In the middle of the cabin, the young student sat motionless. He had been listening. Every word, every tone, every pause. His heart pounded. His mind raced. He knew things. He had studied. He had practiced endlessly. On simulators, in theory, in imagination. But this wasn't a screen. This wasn't a game. This was real. Real altitude. Real speed. Real people. For a moment he stayed still, wrestling with doubt. Who was he to step forward? He wasn't a licensed pilot. He wasn't trained for real emergencies. What if he made things worse? But then another thought broke through the fear. What if no one else did anything at all? The aircraft surged onward, unaware of the silent decision forming in one young mind. Somewhere between fear and courage, between hesitation and responsibility, the course of the flight was about to change forever. That's when the young student finally moved. For several long seconds after the announcement echoed through the cabin, no one had responded. The silence was heavy, almost painful. Fear had frozen the passengers in place. Some stared at the floor. Others looked straight ahead, pretending not to hear the call for help. The reality was terrifying. This wasn't asking for a doctor or a nurse. This was asking for someone who could help fly a commercial aircraft. The young student sat quietly, his hands clenched together, heart pounding so loudly he was sure others could hear it. Every instinct inside him screamed to stay seated, to remain invisible, to let someone else, someone more qualified, stand up. But no one did. He thought about the countless hours he had spent studying aviation out of pure curiosity and passion. Late nights watching cockpit videos, endless practice sessions on flight simulators, learning how aircraft systems worked, how autopilot functioned, how pilots communicated with air traffic control. It had never been about becoming a hero. It was simply something he loved. Still, love and reality were two very different things. This wasn't a simulator. This wasn't practice. This was real. Hundreds of lives were on the line. The announcement came again, more urgent this time. A flight attendant stood near the aisle, scanning faces desperately, her eyes revealing what her voice tried to hide. Fear. That was the moment something shifted inside the student. He took a slow breath. Then another. Before doubt could stop him, he pressed the call button. The soft chime broke the silence. The flight attendant turned immediately, almost running toward him. When she reached his row, she lowered her voice. "Do you have aviation experience?" she asked. The student swallowed hard. "I've studied flight simulators and aviation basics," he said honestly. "I'm not a pilot." The flight attendant hesitated. This wasn't the answer she hoped for, but it was the only answer she had. She nodded quickly. "Please come with me." As he stood, the weight of every eye in the cabin fell onto him. Passengers watched in disbelief as the young student stepped into the aisle. Some whispered prayers. Others stared, unsure whether to feel hope or fear. He felt exposed, like the entire aircraft was holding its breath. The walk to the cockpit felt impossibly long. With every step, his mind raced through procedures he had memorized. Maintain calm. Trust instructions. Listen carefully. Don't panic. He reminded himself of the one thing every instructor, real or virtual, emphasized above all else: focus. The cockpit door opened. Inside, the atmosphere was tense and overwhelming. Lights blinked. Screens glowed with endless data. The co-pilot turned toward him, eyes tired but sharp, measuring him in seconds. "This is who responded?" the co-pilot asked. "Yes," the flight attendant replied quietly. "It's all we have." The co-pilot didn't argue. There was no time. "Sit," he said, pointing toward the pilot's seat. The student hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then stepped forward and sat down. The controls felt different than anything he had ever touched before. He could feel the aircraft through the yoke, the subtle vibrations of a machine moving at unimaginable speed through the sky. This wasn't plastic. This wasn't software. This was real weight, real physics, real danger. Air traffic control came through the radio. Voices calm, professional, steady. "Aircraft, we understand the situation. We are here with you. You are not alone." Those words mattered more than they knew. The student introduced himself, voice steady despite the storm inside him. He explained his background honestly, what he knew, what he didn't. There were no exaggerations, no hero fantasies, just truth. Air traffic control adjusted immediately. They simplified instructions. They slowed communication. They focused only on what mattered. "Keep the autopilot engaged," they said. "Maintain altitude. Follow our guidance step by step." The student nodded, even though they couldn't see him. His eyes scanned the instruments, recognizing layouts he had seen hundreds of times before. Altitude, speed, heading. Familiar, yet terrifying. Every decision felt heavy. The co-pilot remained beside him, assisting where possible, managing communication and systems. Together they formed an unlikely team: experience and passion, professionalism and courage. Minutes passed. The aircraft continued forward, stable for now. In the cabin, passengers waited in silence. No movies played. No conversations continued. Every sound felt amplified: the hum of engines, the faint rattle of overhead compartments, the breathing of strangers united by fear. Back in the cockpit, air traffic control began preparing for the next phase. They identified the nearest suitable airport, cleared airspace, alerted emergency crews. "You're doing well," the controller said calmly. "Just stay focused." The student's hands trembled slightly, but his mind stayed locked in. He remembered the countless simulated landings, the failures, the resets. There would be no reset button here. The realization hit him fully now. If he failed, there would be no second chance. He looked at the unconscious pilot, then at the instruments, then out through the cockpit window at the endless sky. Somewhere below, families waited, lives continued, and above them all, this aircraft flew forward, trusting him. Fear didn't disappear, but courage replaced it. He adjusted his grip, centered his breathing, and committed completely. The moment he took control wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, focused, and real. Hundreds of lives now depended on the calm determination of a young student who had never imagined this day would come. And the hardest part of the journey was still ahead. Against all odds, the aircraft continued its descent, steady, controlled, and guided by calm voices echoing through the cockpit. The young student's hands shook as they rested on the controls. He could feel every vibration of the aircraft, every subtle shift in air pressure, every response of the machine beneath him. His palms were damp, his pulse racing, but his mind, somehow, remained clear. This was the moment everything had been leading toward. "Stay with us," air traffic control said gently through the radio. "You're doing exactly what you should be doing." Those words became his anchor. The autopilot had been disengaged. Now, there was no buffer between human judgment and gravity. The aircraft began its gradual descent toward the runway, miles away but closing fast. Outside the cockpit window, the sky stretched endlessly, painted in soft blues and whites, indifferent to the lives suspended within it. Inside the cockpit, time felt distorted. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. The co-pilot monitored systems carefully, calling out numbers, confirming speeds, checking flaps and landing gear. The student listened intently, absorbing every instruction from air traffic control, repeating them aloud to ensure nothing was missed. Reduce speed. Maintain heading. Lower flaps incrementally. Stay centered. Each command was followed with precision. In the cabin, passengers sensed the change immediately. The aircraft was descending. Seatbelt signs illuminated. Flight attendants moved quietly through the aisles, their expressions serious but hopeful. Some passengers clutched hands. Others whispered prayers. A few wiped tears before they had even fallen. Everyone knew now. This was it. The student focused on the runway lights appearing faintly in the distance, thin lines glowing against the earth below. He had seen this view countless times on simulators, but no screen had ever carried this weight. The runway wasn't just concrete anymore. It was safety. It was survival. "You're lined up," air traffic control confirmed. "Continue your approach." His breathing slowed. Inhale. Exhale. Fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. As the aircraft descended further, turbulence shook the cabin lightly. Gasps rippled through the passengers. A child cried. A woman whispered someone's name over and over. But the plane held steady. The student adjusted gently, resisting the instinct to overcorrect. He remembered the lessons drilled into him. Small movements, smooth control, trust the aircraft. "Easy," the co-pilot said quietly. "You've got this." The runway grew larger, closer, faster. The final moments approached, the most dangerous phase of any flight. "Prepare for landing," air traffic control said. "You are cleared to land." Those words echoed in his mind. Cleared to land. The student's grip tightened. His eyes locked forward. His entire world narrowed to speed, altitude, and alignment. Everything else, fear, doubt, exhaustion, faded into the background. The wheels were seconds from touching the ground. He gently pulled back, just as he had practiced hundreds of times before. The aircraft responded. A brief moment of weightlessness followed. Then contact. The wheels hit the runway. A jolt ran through the cabin, then another. The aircraft bounced once, then settled. The roar of reverse thrust filled the air as the plane slowed rapidly, tires gripping the runway, momentum finally giving way to friction and control. Inside the cockpit, the student held steady, guiding the aircraft straight as it decelerated. Emergency vehicles raced alongside the runway, lights flashing, waiting in case everything went wrong. But nothing did. The aircraft slowed, then slower. Then finally, it stopped. For a heartbeat there was silence. Then the cabin exploded with sound. Passengers erupted into applause, sobs, laughter, prayers, and shouts of relief. Strangers hugged each other. People dropped to their knees. Tears streamed freely, tears of survival, of gratitude, of disbelief. Flight attendants covered their faces, overwhelmed. In the cockpit, the student exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. His hands finally relaxed, trembling as the reality sank in. They were on the ground, They were alive. The co-pilot placed a hand on his shoulder, voice thick with emotion. "You saved us." Emergency crews boarded the aircraft moments later, assisting the pilot and securing the plane. But the story had already spread through the cabin like wildfire. Passengers wanted to see him, to thank him, to understand who he was. As the student stepped out of the cockpit, applause thundered through the cabin again. People stood. Some reached out to touch his arm, as if to confirm he was real. Others simply cried as they whispered thank you. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt exhausted, humbled, overwhelmed. But to everyone else he was something extraordinary. News of the landing spread rapidly. Authorities praised the coordination. Aviation experts called it nearly impossible. Social media exploded with headlines, calling it a miracle, a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Yet the student never claimed greatness. He simply told the truth. "I followed instructions," he said quietly. "I stayed calm, and I trusted what I had learned." That day, he walked away not just as a survivor, but as proof of something far greater. That passion matters. That preparation matters. That courage doesn't always come from experience, but from stepping forward when it matters most. An ordinary flight, a quiet student, an impossible moment, and a landing that proved knowledge, calm, and courage can change history. The end.